Dharmendra sir, shall we start?
Yes. Uh, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to pre-work session module 4. We'll be having interesting content in this module. And we couldn't organize this yesterday because of some other priorities at SPMU. So let us start without much delay and request facilitators to follow up your group members to join as quickly as possible. Okay, we'll start then. So this module is about soil sponge, the Earth's soil carbon sponge. See, the objectives of this module, by the end of this module, we should be learning certain things. And also, there is a specific request that since this is all new set of knowledge, the way certain concepts are explained and the terminology that is used, you need to familiarize yourself with that. Okay, so we'll understand in this module that how nature built vital biosystems by creating Earth's soil carbon sponge, and also we'll develop language and knowledge frameworks, learn about the ABCD model. So this is very interesting and very important. So easy to remember also. As we go into the content, you will realize that. And we'll also learn about soil carbon in much more details. So there are interesting videos. So we'll start with first video, that is introductory video by Walter. So in the first part, there is a recap of how all these modules are structured in a sequential manner. So bit by bit, each week we're focusing on a certain aspect very deeply. So this will be an intro module. Let's start this. We can't hear this audio.
Achieve what were our specific tasks. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this fourth module for the Masterclass series on the Earth's soil carbon sponge. Just to recap where we started from, we had an introduction where we were outlining what the objectives of the Masterclass were and its structure. But then the first module was looking at why natural farming is so critical, particularly for India, but for the whole of humanity's future. The second module looked at what we had to achieve, what were our specific targets at ecological, social, economic levels. What did we need to achieve from natural farming? And the third module last week was then looking at how, coming back to nature and it's really saying, well, natural farming, how did nature create the biosystems that we obviously depend on? And what is it that we need to learn from nature so that we can use that again? And this module number 4, we want to really look at, well, what is the tool, the fundamental tool that nature used? Because that's the basis of our tool for regenerating Earth, but also building healthy farming systems, rebuilding viable communities. And of course, then the subsequent modules will look at specific aspects, the benefits of this in terms of hydrology, biofertility, resilience, etc., and really leading us with a toolkit of how do we actually regenerate landscapes. But okay, so this module is very much about basically the earth, soil, carbon sponge, and how nature used this one single process to achieve everything effectively. And it's very, very important because in a sense, nature doesn't muck around. She did it once, 420 million years ago. She basically said, right, I've got life in the oceans, teeming life in the oceans, limited by nutrient dilution and leaching in from the rock. But the rock, the earth, the land was just bare, dry, hard rock, no life on land. And so basically there was a competitive advantage for life to say, can I colonize that bare rock to exploit the nutrients, to actively get the nutrients from that rock? And of course, she did that by growing fungi initially from the estuarine edge onto the rock to help solubilize that rock to get the nutrients that needed. But in the process, something really quite simple but fundamentally important happened, because by breaking down that hard mineral rock, dense rock, through these microbial fungal processes, you created a mixture of organic detritus, the residual cell walls of the bacteria and fungi, but also mineral detritus. So you had a mixture of mineral and organic detritus, which actually created soil. And so that was the process of pedogenesis, soil formation. And in a sense, that process of pedogenesis, soil formation, has been the fundamental starting point and cornerstone of life on land. And everything that's grown since, the whole terrestrial biosystem that's evolved since. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this fourth module for the Masterclass series on the Earth, soil, carbon, has all been based on pedogenesis. The whole hydrology of the planet, terrestrial ecosystems, has all been based on pedogenesis, the water that rock can hold. Our whole climate,
It has started again.
of the heat dynamics is driven by water. That is, again, substantially driven by pedogenesis, the fact that 29% of the land, or 29% of the planet's surface, which is a land, is now covered with vegetation, soils, hydrating and driving change. So this pedogenesis formation of the soil carbon sponge was really fundamental. And I've got a little set of building blocks here from my granddaughter, and they're just made up of little, just simple circles. And what it illustrates is exactly what nature did. See, when you have a rock, you have these, in a sense, minerals all fused together in a very tight, small, compact little matrix. And this is, of course, heavy, but also there's very little surface availability. But all that nature did is solubilize them, so separated these, as you can see, I'm separating them, and stuck them together. And by sticking them together, you can create an open, three-dimensional matrix of mineral particles, which are then stuck together and separated by organic detritus. And as you can see, you end up with a completely different three-dimensional configuration, but also spatial configuration. The matrix that is formed as a result of pedogenesis is often 3 times less dense. So up to 66% of these matrix, open matrix, is actually made up of nothing, of air, of voids. And of course, this has profound effects because this allows now water to infiltrate into this matrix, whereas in this case, it just ran off. But it also increases the surface area exposure of mineral particles. If you look at the 2 red sort of circles, there's 2 red circles here, but if you look at them here, they're all exposed, all available, whereas in the rock, they were unavailable. And so you end up with basically these 3-dimensional changes in soil creating water holding capacity, creating nutrient availability, creating the capacity for roots to proliferate, and creating healthy soils. And so really, this is what a healthy soil is. It is exactly the same mineral structure, but it's just changed in its three-dimensional matrix formation, and that gives it profoundly new properties. But again, nature is so clever. She did this by effectively adding nothing, by just actually creating spaces. So we are in the same world now. We can basically say we can create healthy soils by adding nothing, by just using natural fungal processes, microbial processes of petagenesis to restructure soil mineral particles and organic particles. And that's in essence, what we're doing by rebuilding the Earth's soil carbon sponge. We're taking hard, compacted rock and soils that are in this condition and therefore can't infiltrate water, can't make nutrients available. We're just changing their dimensions and configuration like this so that they can. So that's the simple message of rebuilding the soil carbon sponge. And of course, this was only done once. Nature had to evolve this once. And by doing it once in this very simple way, she was able to start growing soils all over the 29% of the Earth's surface, the 14 billion hectares of ice-free land. And of course, very quickly, by building soils, by being able to retain more water, you were able to get plants to grow. It's these fungi, again, that basically grew to create the three-dimensional structure. They then fused with blue-green algae to create symbioses. We still see them everywhere around us, the lichens. And it's then these lichens initially that made the soils, but then very quickly plants were able to establish in those soils and in very short time proliferate vegetation right across the 14 billion hectares of land on this planet. So in a sense, this one single process of petagenesis gave life, gave nature the means to regenerate Earth, to regreen the Earth, to rehydrate the Earth. And we're exactly in that same situation now, because we've been basically breaking down these structures. We've been compacting them and collapsing them and making them less aerated, less open, and lowering their availability of water holding capacity, nutrient availability. And all we have to do is to say, okay, how do we enhance the same fungal processes to start rebuilding these 3D structures? So the challenge is simply, yes, petagenesis, soil carbon sponge formation, by encouraging the fungi to really do what it's been doing for 420 million years, what nature's been doing for 420 million years.
Yeah, this is an introductory video with a recap of how all the previous modules have covered. So he is emphasizing on the one fundamental tool that is that nature uses. So it is soil carbon sponge, and there is only one single process that has led to all this to happen. Like life was there in the oceans first, and then leaching of minerals, nutrients from the rocks happened, and fungi colonized those rocks to extract nutrients. Fungi grew, and the solubilization of rocks kept happening. And by breaking down hard mineral rock, organic mineral debris and microbial debris has formed. It has kind of contributed to soil carbon sponge. So soil formation is the cornerstone for all life. And he's telling that whole hydrological systems are dependent on this pedogenesis, and also the water dynamics of the planet, the heat dynamics is through soil pedogenesis. So it is really fundamental. And he went on to explain how rocks, the properties of rocks vary with soil, and because of pedogenesis, soil formed from rocks. So he was comparing rocks to a stack of discs where limited surface was available, uh, and it cannot hold water. Nutrients are locked inside, are not available. And now nature has separated all of those particles and glued them so that they stay stable and voluminous. And now they have 3D configuration. Now the soil structure is 3 times less dense. So it is making water to infiltrate and increasing surface area, and which is an indicator of healthy soils. So once the structure has changed, the total physical properties are also changed in the soil. So healthy soils are actually it is adding nothing by the agency of fungi. So what he was telling was it was done only once in the nature, the beginning, and that process has resulted in all of the 29% of Earth surface.
అవునవును.
Sorry for the interruption. Please keep your mics muted. You're supposed to listen to this. So, so this pedogenesis process has impacted all of 29% of Earth's surface, and that is 14 billion hectares. And fungi were active, and blue-green algae, they got into symbiotic relations, and lichen, that is algae plus fungi complex. These all, with all the agency of all of these plants could establish, and terrestrial ecosystems have come about. So this is that single process that is changed everything on the face of Earth, literally. So what nature did for 20 million years ago, we are exactly doing the same through fungi. So we need to again depend on microbes, that is fungi, to rebuild our soils. This is the gist of video 1. Now we'll go to video 2.
Okay, and so that's really becomes a tool of what we're about. And of course,
1 second,
to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that's really becomes a tool of what we're about. Very, very simple.
Yeah, in this module, I think Walter is explaining about ABCD model. So this is a live recording, especially for this class. This is a recording, and there is another video, 4th video in the sequence in the module that is given to us. That is an extended version. So we will be skipping that, but that covers even a lot more details. So for the time being, we'll be watching this 2nd video. We'll not be watching 4th video, but you are supposed to watch 4th video for greater details. Okay. Okay. Please continue, Shivkot.
Very practically, just as nature can. And of course, it's as simple as A, B, and C. It's that practical and simple. And let's just break it down. It starts off with A, which is, of course, agriculture. Okay, so it starts with farmers all over the earth through agriculture, through growing plants, putting carbon from the air, CO2 from the air, fixing it, carbon, water, sunshine, to make sugars, to make biomass. And so that's the first starting point. A, photosynthesis, maximizing the drawdown, the fixation of carbon dioxide from the air via plants in creating biomass. And of course, agriculture does this exquisitely effectively, okay? Because agriculture has, right through the last 8,000 years, looked at maximizing above ground plant growth. And that's a starting agenda A. But what then is important is not just maximizing the growth of A, and that's where we've always focused on agriculture yields, but actually looking at beyond that, saying what is it that happens to every gram, every ton of carbon biomass that we produce. You know, if we've got a cropping system, we might be producing 6 tons of above ground biomass per hectare. We take some of that off as seed for our crop. But really the big question now is what happens to that 6 tons, or at least the 5 tons of stubble that we're not basically using in crops. And it's what happens to it that governs actually soil structure and soil formation. 2 things can happen to that, only 2 things, right throughout evolutionary time, 2 things. It can either burn, i.e., it can burn or oxidize back to CO2 very rapidly or slowly microbially, but basically all the carbon that we fix through plants can get oxidized back to CO2. And of course, in that process, we lose any structural advantage that may have given us. Or alternatively, we can actually turn that biomass, again through fungi, different fungi this time, we can turn that into stable soil carbon. And it's that stable soil carbon which acts as the glues and the spacers and the sponges that keeps these open 3-dimensional matrix functional. So we've got this very simple analogy of B or C. We can either burn it or oxidize it, or we can actually turn that plant fixed biomass into stable soil carbon to help regenerate the Earth's soil carbon sponge. And in a sense, it's that difference between B and C, or not just the difference, the actual ratio of B and C that we actually have agency over. That's how we can influence, we totally influence soil development, soil health, and our future through that ratio of B and C. How much of that biomass that we fix is burnt versus how much is put into stable soil carbon. Okay, industrial agriculture, green revolution agriculture was fundamental in taking that biomass that we fixed and adding fertilizers, cultivating, biocides, fallowing, and adding a whole lot of inputs to try to maximize yields. But while it realized it, the consequences were a bit hidden, because by adding all these processes, these expensive fossil fuel inputs, we were actually oxidizing that soil. We are oxidizing the carbon that we're producing very, very rapidly. So basically, all of these inputs, whether we're clearing, burning, over-fertilizing, biocides, bare fallowing, cultivating, all of those high energy inputs are actually very, very actively oxidizing that biomass that we fixed with A back into CO2. In fact, industrial agriculture over the planet, particularly the last 70 years, has basically driven so much CO2 into the air that it's the main process by which CO2 levels in the atmosphere have increased, directly from fossil fuel use in agriculture partly, but also from vast quantities of carbon that's been oxidized from the natural carbon that was in the soil. So often we're now oxidizing 100% plus of the carbon. We're oxidizing all of A plus some of the heritage carbon that had been there, stored there by nature from our soils. And as a consequence, our soils are being degraded, compacted, and going back equivalent to rock, where they don't hold water, they don't make nutrients available, they don't let roots to grow, and of course the whole biosystem crashes. So we've gone from a sponge back to effectively compacted, degraded soils, and in that process, degrading our whole future, leading to civilization collapses. Obviously, the alternative is to make that biomass that is fixed by plants and turning it into stable soil carbon. And of course, we can do that just through natural farming practices. Farming practices that minimize the inputs, but also maximize the natural fungal activities, which are turning then the sugars, the cellulose, the lignin, from the residues, from the roots, the root exudates of plants into stable soil carbon. The particular fungi, we don't have to go into details here, but the basidiomycetes are turning all that biomass into the humates that are so important in our soil, and then all the mycorrhizal fungi that are colonizing the roots of plants, 98% of plants, taking 40% or so of the carbon from the plants and turning it into mycelial biomass, and of course then into a stable soil carbon called glomalin, which is again critically important in keeping these open carbon matrices functional. So we control through our land management the ratio of B and C, the ratio of oxidation, and the ratio of actually fixation of stable soil carbon through natural farming processes. And it's our management of B and C and that ratio through our farming practices, which is our point of agency. We don't have to be purist about it. The bottom line is if we can get 60% plus of the biomass formed in A, stored as stable soil carbon, we are significantly enhancing the health of our soils, their productivity. What then happens is actually quite fundamental and also exciting. Because once we put carbon into the soil, the stable soil carbon, we trigger a whole sequence of positive feedback processes. These are totally natural, and basically they drive then the productivity of our biosystems without inputs. So that's where we get the zero input, higher productivity dividends. For example, every gram of extra carbon we can put into the soil, as we've sort of shown, can vastly increase the water infiltration, water retention, water availability of that soil without the need for irrigation. So we're getting a massive hydrological dividend. Every gram of carbon can hold up to 8 grams of extra water in its organic matter structure and up to 20 grams of extra water in the soil structure it creates. Every gram of carbon we put into the soil can obviously vastly enhance the surface area availability of nutrients, the exposure, and therefore the solubilization availability. As we saw, these 2 red ones, if they were phosphorus, they're available, whereas previously they weren't available. Every gram of carbon we put into the soil can vastly increase the rootability, the capacity of those soils to infiltrate and allow roots to proliferate throughout them. And so the volume of soil that is able to be actually exploited by those plants can grow up dramatically. Instead of using 10, 20 centimeters of surface soil and having roots confined there under industrial agriculture, we're able to use 2 meters, 10 times that volume of soil, and of course, exponentially increase the water and the nutrient resources available for plant growth. And it's these dividends, these positive feedbacks, all free because of building that soil carbon sponge, which is the basis of resilience and productivity in biosystems. It's those dividends that enable ever more productive natural ecosystems to function and grow, rainforests to form on very poor soils, for example, simply through these positive feedback processes, these soil carbon sponge processes, rather than having dependence on added inputs. But also in agriculture, it's powerful because it allows us to now enhance and sustain higher yields, more nutritious food without the need for inputs. So we can minimize the need for those expensive oxidative fossil fuel imports, the cultivation, the fertilizer, the biocides, the irrigation. We can minimize those needs because we've got these natural soil carbon processes giving us productivity as a consequence. So that's really the power of natural farming, and it all hinges on this simple change in the physical structure of our soil. Simply by creating this three-dimensional matrix through the fungal aggregation of these soils, we've fundamentally changed the fertility, the productivity, the resilience of those soils and the biosystems in our future. Now, basically, we know this, and we've known this right throughout civilization. Innovative farmers everywhere have been doing it. The whole basis of productive agriculture in East Asia, China, Korea, Japan, India, for 4,000 years has all been based on soil carbon formation, natural nutrient cycling, natural farming processes. And it's really only the last 100 years of industrial agriculture where we've actually forgotten about it and gone back to collapsing and degrading soils. But innovative farmers all over the world are fixing up to 10 tons of carbon per hectare per annum through natural farming, regenerative farming processes. And not that everyone has to achieve 10 tons of carbon, some are doing more, but the fact is we've just got to change that ratio B to C to move on to that pathway. The bottom line is, whatever crop you're growing, can you get 60% of that contributing to actually building the health of your soil? You're, of course, already ahead of the game because the roots and the root exudates from a plant, they're mostly getting 60, 70% of the carbon already. So a lot of that carbon is already, as we say, down under in the soil where the fungi can use it as long as we don't oxidize it. Globally, we can do this at a massive scale rapidly all over the planet. At the moment, basically, we've got an increasing level of carbon dioxide in the air, and we've got to basically draw down that CO2 from the air. We don't have to just slow emissions. We have actually got to draw down carbon emissions from the air, and the only place we can put it naturally, practically, is in the soils. Okay, and we can do that at the rate of some 20 billion tons of carbon sequestration per year through natural farming practices globally. We can do that practically and profitably, rapidly, within a decade. Okay, drawing down 20 billion tons through farmers everywhere adopting regenerative natural farming practices that stop oxidizing the carbon into the air. Every year there's some 250 billion tons of carbon that is either released or drawn down. So that the flux of carbon, the dynamic of carbon in the atmosphere globally is about 250 billion tons. So the 20 billion tons of extra drawdown that we're talking about is 8% of that annual flux. Totally practically achievable, but the bottom line is we must do that now. The only way we can do that rapidly, practically, is through natural regenerative farming, as you are demonstrating in India. And the critical thing is not just to draw down carbon, but to put it into our soils to rebuild the soil carbon sponge, and through that, the hydrology, the biofertility on which our food, our water, our social future depends. But look, I'll leave it there for this module now. Next module, we'll be talking about the sponge, but also how it actually is fundamental in rehydrating the hydrology of soils and landscape, because water is life. And really, it's only by regenerating the soil carbon sponge that we can secure our future water needs and thereby life. Water, of course, is also, as I mentioned earlier, the driver of the Earth's climate. 95% of the heat dynamics is driven by hydrology, and the natural safe cooling processes that we're going to depend on in the next decades can only again come from regenerating the Earth's soil carbon sponge to provide that water, to provide that natural safe cooling. But look, let's look at that in the next module. So thank you very much, and we'll look forward to that. All the very best.
Yeah, okay. So he was talking about the model. He's proposing his own model, like ABCD. Can someone tell what these letters stand for? A for what, B for what? You can use the chat box. Time for you, 1 minute. What is A? What is B? What is C? What is D?
So A is the agriculture, raising of crops and
Okay.
creating a lot of biomass. So
Great.
B is by using chemical agriculture. Again, the organic carbon is oxidized into carbon dioxide and entering into the atmosphere. Then C is again they develop the soil organic carbon. In that sense, 1 gram holds this much of water, and so like that. Then D is the soil carbon sequestration. That is again we have to bring back the carbon dioxide into the soil. That is draw down into the soils. Yes, this is ABC.
Okay. So the others also can keep. Yeah. B is burnt and oxidized. Okay. Shravanti, continue, please. Okay. So who will tell what is D? Okay. So after pedogenesis, now now next process is what? So Walter is introducing simple way of understanding all this, calling it ABCD. A is for agriculture. Agriculture is a very important process where carbon dioxide from the air is utilized and C is fixed, and if and photosynthesis can be maximized using agriculture. So the way of fixing atmospheric carbon dioxide is very efficiently done by agriculture. So, and also he tells that agriculture is not just about maximizing the productivity of crop, but several important functions are also there beyond it. Okay. So Give me 1 second. Yeah, so agriculture, apart from giving the production, it serves other important functions also. Like, for example, 6 tons of above ground biomass we may be utilizing, but there is a lot of biomass in the form of roots, around 5 tons of stubble, which we are not using it. Okay, so now B and C comes to play. So what happens to this biomass? Okay, there are only 2 things that can happen. Whether it can be burnt means even oxidizing also. So oxidizing, okay, so again CO2 is released when it is oxidized or burnt. Oxidization is a chemical term for burning. Okay, so that can be one pathway. And then what if that is happening, what happens to is soil structure is lost. Okay, so far what nature has given us a good structure, that will be lost. So alternatively, what we can do is we can use various fungi. Okay, and C is for stabilizing that carbon. Okay, carbon stabilization. So these fungi again, they work with the biomass, and the carbon is pumped into the soil. So we can either burn or oxidize. So B and C is whether you can burn the carbon or you can stabilize that carbon. So what Walter is telling is our management practices have an influence on how this B is to C ratio can be like. Whether more of burning happens through your management and less of stable carbon in the soil, or the reverse. So our management practices have influence over it. And then he describes how industrial agriculture played a role in burning of this carbon, okay, oxidizing of soil carbon. So industrial green revolution was adding a lot of inputs which are prepared by burning a lot of fossil fuels, even in the making of fertilizers or pesticides or some other things, machinery, all of that. Fossil fuels were used in order to maximize A, that is agricultural productivity. So in the process, it is oxidizing soil carbon very rapidly. So industrial green revolution model is directly releasing a lot of CO2 by fossil fuel burning, and indirectly by oxidizing soil carbon. Okay, so by 2 ways industrial agriculture is oxidizing carbon. So this it is not just when industrial agriculture is oxidizing soil carbon, it is not that which is added to the soil through agriculture, but also heritage carbon, means it was inherited through other sources long time back. Say carbon was stable in the soil, that carbon is also getting lost. And now because of this agriculture green revolution agriculture model, soils became compacted and went back to the original state of being a rock. So sponge to rock, it has happened, and civilization will collapse if it is the situation. So alternatively, natural farming, it minimizes inputs and maximizes the activity of soil fungi. And a particular type of basidia fungi, they turn biomass into humates. And mycorrhiza can associate with 98% of the roots and creating mycorrhizal colonies, and they are particularly involved in creating a special carbon called glomalin, stable soil carbon. So glomalin stays in the soil for very long, and it is kind of sticky properties that kind of holds the soil particles together, or it is critical in making soil carbon sponge, where 3D structure of soil sponge is maintained. So uh, this is about how green revolution is aiding in the burning of carbon, and how natural farming can reverse it and start pedogenesis process once again. So, and D is about dividends. So what dividends can we get through natural farming once the soil carbon sponge is there? Okay, so there will be through natural farming, there will be productivity dividends. A lot of high yields we can get without spending a lot of money. With very low investments, you can have high productivity dividends. That is one type of dividend. And also second aspect you told was like every gram of carbon that we put in soil, it vastly increases the porosity, nutrients and water holding capacity. Without irrigation also, it can store a lot of water. So what he's telling is there is a lot of massive hydrological dividend. So without irrigation also, it is able to provide water for plants. So in our NF fields also, farmers were reporting earlier, I used to irrigate my field every once in 3 days, but now weekly once is sufficient. So what is happening there? So a lot of water holding capacity has increased. So because of increase in soil carbon. So what he told is 1 extra gram of carbon can hold extra 8 grams of water. That is one aspect. And the other is that because of the structure, an extra 20 grams of water can be stored in the pore spaces. Okay. So it is a great hydrological dividend. Carbon itself holds 8% to its weight. And also because of the structure it created, it can store 20 grams of water. Okay. So, and there are huge nutrition dividends also. A lot of nutrients get exposed and accessed by plant roots, and then that gets into food system and into our body, all of that. So, and these are all the dividends. So he also tells that every gram of carbon improves soil structure, and industrial agricultural practices provides only soil depth of 10 to 20 centimeters. Okay, in that model only top 20 centimeters are influenced by plant roots, all of that. And plants can access only what is available in top 20 centimeters. But whereas in natural farming, around 2 meters of soil, topsoil, is accessed by plant roots. Okay, which means when soil sponge is developed, your roots can go freely up to 2 meters, access nutrients, water, all of that. It is like 10 to 20 times increase in the area for plant roots to gather nutrients and water. So he is telling that we can minimize external expensive inputs, which are fossil fuel based, and simply changing the soil structure and bringing about aggregation, we can change everything. So like innovative natural farming farmers are fixing 10 to 12 tons of carbon per hectare per annum. Okay, so it is possible when we are changing the B is to C ratio. Okay, so 20 billion tons of carbon sequestration per year globally can be achieved if all the lands are practicing natural farming. 20 billion tons of carbon can be sequestered every year. And another important statistics he told is that 250 billion ton of carbon is either released or drawn down. So it is like changing from one process to other. It is in a flux. So in the overall 250 billion tons, 20 billion ton of carbon through natural farming is about 8% of annual flux. So which is totally achievable, and there is no time to wait. We have to do it now. So this is the gist of the second video. Please go through the fourth video for more details. So this is the overall outline of ABCD model. So I hope it is clear to you now. So now you know what A stands for, B stands for, C and D, right? Okay, great. Will any responses on this? Any questions? You can put your questions in the chat box. Okay, so we'll move to the next video, Sivakoti. Thank you.
You've got to grow plants. You know, the only thing that fixes CO2, sunshine, water into carbons, you know, are plants, because that's the only thing that converts that through photosynthesis into sugars. And now we've got to basically say, how do we get those sugars into that soil to create that sponge? And we can do it diagrammatically. So just say there's that nice grass plant that we were looking at. And it's basically fixing, you know, sun, CO2 and water, and it's making sugars. And in a sense, what we've always been concerned about, really, our whole agriculture, our whole mentality is, hey, we want to maximize, you know, plant growth, maximize yield. But in nature, it's a bit more sophisticated, because what matters isn't how much you actually can grow, but what happens to every gram, every molecule of sugar that you produce, right? And in nature, it's really, plants have got it pretty well worked out. They put about 40% up into the tops. They put about 30% into their root biomass. They put another 30% into your root exudates, right? These are the sugars that leach out from the roots. They feed this vast network of fungal hyphae and bacteria and actinomycetes, massive sort of networks of fungal hyphae and so forth. And really, they are the microbial drivers of productivity. 25,000 kilometers of fungal hyphae per cubic meter of healthy soils. So how long can we keep things green, alive, resilient, growing, and surviving in that habitat? Only 390 millimeters of rain, so it's longevity of growth. It's not how fast do we grow things, it's how long can we grow things. That's really what nature and what we have to focus on.
So this is a very short video. Here we'll know, because of your agricultural practices, it's not just important what you grow, but what happens to every gram of sugar that is produced by your plant. Okay, so the photosynthates that are prepared by plants, photosynthetes are sugars, okay, carbohydrates. So through photosynthesis they are produced, and plant utilizes them no, 40% of them to develop the above ground biomass, that is shoot, stems, all of that. And 30% of them is for root development, okay, root system. And 30% of the root sugars are exuded through the tips of root hairs, okay. So 30% is intentionally leaked into the soil, okay. So this 30% of sugars, it creates a lot of microbial associations around plant roots. So he is telling that it is important to have the longevity of growth. Means plants, soil being able to support crop growth for longer duration than how fast, okay, how fast, okay. So this is a very simple video to show that 40% of the sugars are utilized for shoot development, 30 for root development, 30 are released as exudates. Okay, next video, please.
I'm Andrea Beisch, an agricultural scientist with the Union of Concerned Scientists. Today, I'm going to talk about soil, you know, the dirt under our feet. I'm going to show you how soil can help protect our communities and the farmers who grow our food from floods and droughts. Here we have 2 soil samples, one that's healthy and rich in organic matter. For almost 20 years, the farm field that it came from has been protected and well fed. It's been covered with plants year-round and it hasn't been plowed. And here we have soil that's been left bare for many months of every year. It's also been degraded by regular plowing, leaving it less healthy. Now watch what happens when it rains. Hard. Our healthy soil over here is soaking up a lot of this downpour, like a sponge. And look what happened over here. The soil couldn't absorb the water and flooded. Today, much of the nation's farmland is treated this way. We plant crops that only grow for part of the year, leaving the soil bare and unprotected the rest of the time. Because this soil is healthier, it will hold water longer through times when there is little or no rain, helping plants withstand drought. The amount of water absorbed here might seem small, so let's see what this looks like on a larger scale. Imagine acres and acres of farmland made up of the unhealthy soil. The amount of water that isn't absorbed can run off and flood nearby communities. If the soil were healthier, it could absorb the water, and we'd see a lot less runoff. Our new analysis found that runoff from heavy rain events could be reduced by nearly 1/5 if soil was fed and well protected. And flood frequency could be reduced by about the same amount. Healthy soil is good for farmers, and it's good for communities downstream from farms. So how do we get healthier soils on farms? By growing plants on the land year-round. Planting different varieties of crops with deep roots. And managing grasslands to prevent overgrazing. Our analysis found that practices like these help the soil absorb more water 70% of the time. Soil is more than just dirt. It can be a solution to problems faced by farmers and cities. Here at the Union of Concerned Scientists, we're working to make it easier for farmers to make these changes and build healthier, spongy soil.
Yeah, this is also a very simple video. They were talking about healthy soils are well fed, okay, and the unhealthy soils are those that are left bare, okay. So healthy soils have physical properties that can soak lots of water, and there is a comparison between how much water can be stored or can be infiltrated into healthy soils versus unhealthy soils. So the floods, the runoff of runoff and floods can be greatly reduced to an extent of 1/5 if all the soils are healthy. So there won't be flooding because there will be a lot of infiltration instead of surface runoff. Okay. Yeah. So cover crops and polycrops and preventing overgrazing are recommended in order to maintain the health of soils. Okay, that is a short video. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Did we miss the carbon cycle, Shivkoti?
No, sir.
Khan Academy second video. Look into the module. Yeah, there are two links for Khan Academy. Go up. Yeah. Yes. We can't hear.
It's the beginning, but they just
So just hold on. This is about understanding, carbon, how carbon changes its forms and how it is vital in everything around us and in us. Okay.
want to talk a little bit about carbon and how it cycles through our biosphere. And we touch on this in other videos, but when we talk about elements like carbon, they don't just appear and disappear all of a sudden in our biosphere. For the most part, they have been here since the beginning, but they just get recycled from one form to another. And that is also true of carbon. And to appreciate carbon's importance in our biosphere and especially to life, I have some important molecules or examples of important molecules that involve carbon. And all of these, the carbons are these dark gray colors. So this right over here, this molecule, this is glucose. Glucose, simple sugar. It's where we can derive a lot of our energy from. This is ATP. You could view it as a more immediate store of energy in biological systems. This right over here is one of many amino acids. The amino acids make up our proteins. This right over here is DNA. And in all of these, you can see the role that carbon's playing. In fact, sometimes the carbon's hard to see because it's closer to the center of these molecules, because the carbon, for the most part, forms a backbone. Because carbon's this really neat element, this really neat atom that can make four bonds. So it can make these really cool structures. But the question is, how does carbon cycle through our biosphere? And we can get as simple or as complex as we want to when we discuss this. But on very simple terms, and this is how my brain tends to think about the carbon cycle, you can imagine the carbon in our atmosphere that's mainly in the form of molecular carbon dioxide. So this right over here, this is CO2. Once again, the carbon is in the middle of there, bonded to the two oxygens. And as much as we talk about CO2, and as important as carbon is to living systems, in fact, our bodies are 18 to 19% carbon by mass. So it's very important for biological systems. As important as carbon is to biological systems and the role carbon dioxide plays in things like global warming, it actually makes up a very small percentage of our atmosphere. It's only about 0.04% of the gas in our atmosphere. Most of our atmosphere is actually nitrogen, 78%. You don't talk a lot about it. And oxygen, 21%. And then a bunch of other elements and molecules. But the very simple version of the carbon cycle is, okay, you have this atmospheric carbon dioxide, molecular carbon dioxide hanging out in the air, and you have autotrophs like plants. So let's say that this is the ground, and I have a growing plant. So that's a plant right over there. That's its leaf. That's another leaf. And the way that plants grow is they're able to take light energy, so that's energy coming in from the sun, and use that energy to fix carbon. Now, fixing carbon sounds like a very fancy thing, but it's literally taking that molecular carbon dioxide out of the air and fixing the carbon from it to form these different molecules in the plant that help the plant, that give the plant structure, that give the plant energy. And so that mass of that plant, I'm actually in this room I'm in, there's a house plant right next to me. It's not just growing out of, I mean, I guess you could say it's growing out of thin air, but the mass isn't just magically appearing. It's taking that mass out of the air. And so that's what allows this plant to keep growing. And so once again, as I said, some of that will be in the form of proteins, amino acids. It could form structural components. There could be fats. And also some of it is energy. And you could imagine other animals that can't do this, that can't photosynthesize. Well, they might want to eat these plants for that energy. In other videos, we talk about the food cycle. And so, this could be me. This could be me having a salad. And I might want to eat that plant. I might want to eat the plant for the sugar in it. Maybe it's an apple of some kind, and then that gives my body the energy to live and grow. And as I metabolize that glucose, so for example, glucose is one of the molecules that plant can form by taking that carbon out of the air, and then I might metabolize that glucose from that plant I just ate, and as I do that, I will release carbon dioxide. So I will release the CO2 back in the air. And then you can see that you can form a cycle here. The CO2 gets released by things that are metabolizing these organic molecules, and then it can get fixed again by autotrophs, which are able to store the energy from the sun in terms of these bonds by fixing this carbon. But there's other pathways that we can have to have these cycles. For example, some of the CO2, it could be absorbed into the ocean. It could be absorbed into the ocean. And the ocean, it can form carbonate. And so once again, you still see the carbon right over there, carbon bonded to 3 oxygens. And calcium carbonate is a key constituent in things like seashells. And over time, as the seashells break down and get ground up and they get impacted with pressure, and they can form limestone. So this right over here is limestone. But once again, it was formed from carbon dioxide being absorbed into the ocean, living things using that calcium carbonate, the carbonate in conjunction with calcium, in order to form these shells, which get ground down, and it actually forms these rock structures. You can have situations where living things, whether we're talking about the autotrophs like plants, or we're talking about things like me that are eating the plants, that, well, once they die and there's all this organic matter that hasn't been broken down yet, well, it gets buried in the ground. I'll do the plant because it's less morbid than showing me dead. So let's say this is the plant. Well, with enough pressure and time, sometimes in the decomposing process, some of the carbon might be released, but over time, this might be compressed and be turned into fossil fuels. So when you see oil, or when you are burning gasoline, which is really just a refined part of the oil, it is really this organic matter that storing energy that plants were able to store from light energy, possibly millions or tens of millions of years ago. But then if you were to take that fossil fuel out of the ground, which we now do very actively in order to power all of the things that we need to power, and you were to burn it, so let me see, let me just draw an example of that. So let's say that if you had a canister of oil, I'm not going to do the oil in black because you'd have trouble seeing it, and if you were to burn it, the process of combustion, and this is in general if you're burning anything, it doesn't just have to be oil, it could be burning a piece of wood. You're taking that you're taking that organic matter, those carbon-carbon bonds, and in some ways you could say you're doing the reverse of the photosynthesis process. You're breaking it down, and in that process you're releasing that carbon, and it's getting released in the form of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, which in theory could then be fixed once again. So the general idea, autotrophs like plants, when they photosynthesize, they can fix that carbon, and then it could either be burnt, and the combustion process can release that carbon back into the atmosphere, or you could have other animals eating that plant, and then as they metabolize, as they break these carbon-carbon bonds to power themselves or to just do whatever they need to do, that also can release carbon dioxide.
So this is about carbon cycle. I think it is fairly clear. It is the basics of all the cycles that we learn. So I think we can skip this. The gist is that carbon changes from form to form, and it is an important constituent of our body and all life in general. and in oceans, how carbon becomes carbonate and a major ingredient of crustaceans, all the sea life, and then the shells later disintegrate and become limestone. All of that, that's a cyclical process. All of that. So some of the hydrocarbons have become fossil fuels, and we are digging that up, and when we burn it again, carbon dioxide is released, and carbon in the air is about 0.04%. So this, I think you should get a hang of more details from this carbon cycle. So we'll go quickly to a major big video. I think, are we going to now Christine Jones? Shivkoti?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So this is a longer video, 37 minutes, but very, very loaded presentation. A lot of statistics and new knowledge definitely we'll have from this. Christine Jones is what ABC sir constantly refers her. It's a great, great lectures are there. I think Amazing Carbon or something is her website. You can have, I'll share that website link in the chat box. Her other works, presentations, YouTube videos, you can access from her website. Okay, now let's watch this. And I would encourage you to take notes, and if you have any doubts at any point of time, put that in chat box so that we can discuss for some time, 5 or 6 minutes, that's all. Okay.
Khan Academy వాళ్ళది మొదటి వీడియో ఓపెన్ అవ్వడం లేదు, అది టెక్స్ట్ ఓపెన్ అవుతుంది.
అది టెక్స్ట్ సార్, అది టెక్స్ట్ రీడింగ్ మెటీరియల్ అది.
ఓహో, రెండోదే వీడియో. ఓకే,
కరెక్ట్.
It's a great honour to be here, and I'm looking forward to discussing things further with people during the breaks. I've got 40 minutes this morning, so I've been told, to explain the meaning of life, I guess, in 5 words or less. I'm going to be rushing through this fairly quickly, so if you would want to ask questions, we won't really have time this morning. But this afternoon, I'm hoping to allow a little bit of time in my talk to be able to field questions, or as I said, you can chat to me during the breaks. This is, some of you may have seen this, Darren Corman's work on Canadian net farm income. I realise this is a different country, but I think you'll agree that the statistics are fairly similar to what's happening here in the United States. I don't have a pointer either, sorry, unless, no, that's not one. Okay, I do have those things in my bag. I should have brought them up here. But anyway, if you have a look, this goes from 1926 to 2016, this 80-year period here. If you look right up to about 1970, you'll see the blue line, or the blue area, is actually the gross revenue earned from agricultural production. So it goes up and down depending on the seasons, on commodity prices and all that sort of thing. We're aware of all these changes that happen to gross revenue over time. The green line is net farm income. It's your net revenue back on the farm. And you'll see that up to about 1970, when seasons were good and commodity prices were good and gross revenue went up, net farm income went up as well, and then when things went down, net farm income went down. And that's the kind of relationship between gross and net that we would like to see. But then after about 1970, those two lines start going in different directions. Gross farm income, or gross revenue, continued to go up, and it is still going up. But the green line, your net farm income, has been going down. And in fact, in 2006, which I figure was probably the same thing here, it's in the red because of the low corn prices in that year. So what is going on? Why are these two lines separating and going in different directions? Well, if we have a look in a little more detail at this data, and I have a link to this paper if anyone would like it, it's very, very insightful. In the 32-year period from 1985 to 2016, that is agribusiness, like the input suppliers, the people who supply you with your seeds and your fertilisers and your tractors, and the lenders and all those, the service providers, received $1.32 trillion of the $1.35 trillion of revenue earned through agricultural production. In other words, 98%. So 98% of what was earned in the agricultural industry went to input providers. And today the majority of Canadian farmers are supported by off-farm income, taxpayer-funded support schemes, asset sales and borrowed money. Does that sound familiar? Well, and farm debt in Canada is at a record high, just under $100 billion, and farm debt in the USA is also at a record high. And we down under in Australia, we can't point the finger at what you guys are doing up here, because we have exactly the same trend happening in Australia. So that figure there, the green line is our revenue and or the gross value of farm production, and the red line is debt. So debt is overtaking our farm production. And if we just look in something that I'm a little bit more familiar with, we grow a lot of wheat in Australia, and our average wheat yield doubled between 1980 and 2000, and in that same period, farmers' profits halved. So I'm not pointing the finger at the United States by any means. Now, we're repeatedly told that we need to produce more to get out of this mess, but it's actually not about maximising yield. So it's not about maximising yield, it's actually about optimising profit. And we have to regenerate the resource base, and we want to be producing nourishing food. So I just want to dwell on that for a moment. We're linking soil health and human health. Lloyd Noble, who was the founder of the Noble Foundation, said that no civilization has outlived the usefulness of its soils. Well, I want to add to that that no civilization has outlived the health of its citizens. And if you think that's a grand statement, you really need to look at the health situation here in the United States. At the moment, United States citizens spend twice as much on health care than people in any other country in the world, but your health and life expectancy actually rates 17th on the list of other countries. Cardiovascular disease, cancer and Alzheimer's are the three leading causes of death in this country, and all are nutritionally related. All can be reversed with a change in the diet. 46% of children in the United States now suffer some kind of chronic disease, and those of you who have children or grandchildren will understand exactly what I'm talking about. The childhood illnesses are scary, and they are increasing exponentially. They're not infectious diseases. They're all to do with the food. There's been a dramatic increase in the incidence of over 80 autoimmune disorders in recent years. That's where the body's immunity is not functioning effectively. They currently affect 1 in 6 Americans, and the numbers are growing daily. It's going to be, 1 in 5, 1 in 4, 1 in 3, 1 in 2 very, very quickly. So what are autoimmune diseases? They're non-infectious diseases that include things like diabetes, diabetes, cancer, autism, Alzheimer's, dementia, lupus, multiple sclerosis, inflammatory bowel disease, rheumatoid arthritis, etc., etc. They're all autoimmune. They're all the body dysfunction within the body. Most of these, if not all of them, can be cured with fecal transplants, which indicates that it's something out of balance in the gut microbiome. They're not infectious diseases. They cost the United States $1.1 trillion a year, but that's just looking at it from an economic perspective. They cost a huge amount in heartache and grieving and emotional upsets within families, especially when these diseases occur in children. So in the early 1900s, Professor William Albrecht said that the loss of human and animal health can be related directly to the soil. That was over 100 years ago. The situation has deteriorated even further in the ensuing 100 years. And given the poor health of our soils, which I think most of you will agree, it's hardly surprising that more Americans are dying from a poor diet than any other factor, because you are what you eat. Now, part of the problem is poor food choices, but even those trying to eat good food are not getting the minerals and trace elements that they need. So agriculture is supposedly about food. I realise that in this country a lot of corn, for example, goes into other avenues like ethanol production, but basically we've always thought of farming as being a food production system, and there is something fundamentally wrong with that food, because the nutritional value of today's food is lower than at any point in history. Despite all the technology that we have, we are producing food that really doesn't have the minerals and trace elements in it that it should. We'd have to eat twice as much meat, 3 times as much fruit, and 4 to 5 times as many vegetables just to get the same amount of minerals as would have been available in those same foods in 1940. I have lots of data on that I'm not going to go through this morning because I have a short amount of time, but you will find it on my website, and it's all published in peer-reviewed international scientific journals. So what has been the effect of this mineral depletion on the plants themselves? Well, we're seeing increased plant susceptibility to pests and diseases, which in turn requires the application of insecticides and fungicides that absolutely would not be necessary if we had healthy plants. This reduces farmers' profits, and it's also adding unnecessary chemicals to the food chain, which is part of the problem that we're seeing with our autoimmune disorders. So just to go back to that figure again and look at that really large blue area, it's only farmers that are suffering as a result of this. Agribusiness in general is doing very well, thank you very much. So farmers are spending more and more on inputs, but the situation keeps getting worse and worse. So the official explanation for this lack of nutrient density in our food is the dilution effect. People will tell you, well, yield has increased. Over the decades, yields of various crops have definitely increased, so therefore mineral levels theoretically fall. If you produce twice as much, we're told, then it will have half the amount in it. But we don't actually see that in crops grown in biologically active soils. We see the opposite. There are farmers around the world who are producing more. Their yields are high, their productivity is great, their resilience is fantastic. In lower rainfall or higher rainfall years, they're managing better than some of the other farmers. And then the food that they're producing is a very high nutrient density as well as being high yielding. Some of our farmers in Australia are now procuring markets, particularly in Asia, for nutrient dense food, which is being segregated. It's actually being kept now stored on farm so that it doesn't go into bulk storage and shipped directly to Asia, and they're prepared to pay a premium for that food. They're also paying a premium for food that doesn't contain nitrate, so grains that don't contain nitrate. And why, you would think, are they picking on nitrate? Like, why not be looking at insecticides, fungicides, glyphosate, whatever, you know, the things that you would have imagined would have been the issue? And it's because the nitrate content of the grain is directly related to all of those other factors. If farmers can grow high mineral, well, they can't grow high mineral grain unless they're not using nitrogen fertiliser, so they have to use something else, a biostimulant, which I'll talk about later this afternoon. And those grains that don't have nitrate in them also don't have insecticides and fungicides, etc., because there's no need to apply them. The plant is able to defend itself. So people are now becoming interested in eating that nutrient-dense food because that is the solution to the autoimmune disorders that we're seeing across the world, not just in the United States. So dilution is not the cause, soil depletion is not the cause. The soil test will show you that in total those minerals and trace elements are still in the soil, but they're no longer in the plants. For some reason, plants are no longer able to acquire the minerals and trace elements that they need even though they are there in the soil. So why is that? If we had time today, we could explore that and have a good discussion about what the reasons for that might be. But to answer that question in a short amount of time, we first have to ask several others, and that is, well, what is soil? Really, what is that stuff that you're using to produce this food, and by what processes does it form? Because when we understand what soil is and how it forms, then we can see where we've gone down the wrong track and how we may be able to reverse that, so that we can have the kind of nutrient density in our food that we would like to see. We can start restoring soil health in terms of its carbon content and its soil structure, and we can grow crops that are going to be far more resilient in the face of the climatic extremes that we're now facing, and also be more resistant to pests and diseases, which is what we want in farming, because that means when we grow those kinds of crops that our input costs will go down, and we can start having a green line that very closely follows that blue line. So what is soil, and where does it sit in the hierarchy of life? Well, how often have you heard the phrase, the soil is the foundation of everything? It's probably said quite often at these kinds of conferences. Certainly if you go to a soil science symposium, just about everybody will be getting up and saying soil is the foundation of everything. I used to say it myself. It's one of my favourite sayings. So if we looked at that very simplistically, this is how we all tend to view soil, I'm sure, and certainly for most of my life I have viewed it this way, that you have soil at the bottom of this pyramid. And plants, well, they grow in soil, don't they? And then your animals, if you have livestock, they eat those plants that grow in soil. And then when our crops and pastures aren't performing as we'd like, then we want to add something to the soil to fix it. So if this is the construct, if this is the way that we see the world, our farming agricultural world, if our plants aren't performing as we'd like, our crops aren't producing as we'd like, what's the first thing we do? We go and take a soil sample, send it off to the lab, which will analyse the soil and come back with a report that says the soil's lacking in nitrogen, or it's lacking in phosphorus or potassium or sulphur or calcium or magnesium or something, and you have to add that to the soil to fix it. Right? Isn't that the construct that we've all been told? This is how we see the world, and this is how we deal with the issues if we think our plants or our animals aren't performing as we'd like. It's been our go-to. It's like test the soil, see what's missing. But what if soil is not the base of the pyramid of life? Have we been directing our energies to the wrong thing? And when you look at the input costs that we have and how much reliance we have on that model, take a soil test, add something, and then if your plants still have issues with pests or diseases, then you add other things, the insecticides, the fungicides. Is it because we've actually been looking at soil in the wrong way that we've been making those decisions that aren't leading us in the direction where we need to go? And I'm sure all of you in this room would agree that there could be better ways that we could go that are going to be much more productive and profitable for you, and also better for the environment and for the consumers of your food. So that leads us right back to the question, well, what is soil? How many of you think about that out there when you're working with your soil? What is that stuff? If I had a bucket of soil here, what would it have in it? What is it made of? And what makes it work? We haven't got time to go into that today, as to actually discuss what would be in that bucket and what would be the things that would actually make that productive for you as a farmer. So if we look at the definition of soil, we find that it's weathered rock materials of sand, silt and clay, depending on what kind of soil you have. It's going to probably have had different origins depending where in the world you are. Sometimes it's going to be very sandy, sometimes it's going to be almost pure clay, or it's going to be somewhere in between, and that's what's called your soil texture. But it's not actually soil unless it's been in contact with plant roots. And why are plant roots important? Well, if you go somewhere in the world where there are no plants because the environment is too hostile for plants to grow in, if it's too cold, it's too hot, it's too dry, it's too something, so you could go to the top of a mountain above the tree line where there's no plants growing, and you'll find weathered rock materials, but you won't find any topsoil. You could go to the Sahara Desert where it's too hot for plants to grow, you'll find a whole heap of sand, you won't find any topsoil. And we intuitively kind of know that, but we need to wind back and look the other way. Well, where plants have grown the best over time, that's where most of the topsoil is. So if you look here in the United States, your prairies are have been your best topsoil, because you had good deep soils grown where there was a variety of plants, hundreds of different kinds of ground cover plants, warm season plants, cool season plants that were able to grow at any time of the year that it rained. There was something there that was green, that was actively growing, and very, very deep plant roots. that went down in metric terms several metres, building beautiful deep topsoil. If you take those plants away for any length of time, that soil deteriorates, and the longer it goes without plants, the more it deteriorates. So not only do we have to have plant roots there in the past to build what we consider now to be topsoil, but we need to keep plants there to maintain the health of that soil. You cannot have healthy, fertile, productive topsoil without actively growing green plants and their roots. And we need to look at what kinds of roots they are, how deep they are, how many different sorts there are. So if we look at this like to use an illustration, the soil that is sitting there underneath that grass has over hundreds of years probably been actually built by the presence of that grass plant or other grass plants like it in that grassland situation, because green plants are able to photosynthesize. So they're going to capture carbon dioxide from the air, they're going to utilise light energy and water from the soil to transform carbon dioxide, water and light into biochemical energy in the form of glucose mainly. And then that energy can be moved around inside the plant. It can use some of it to build itself, so it can join the carbon atoms that it's produced during photosynthesis, during the production of that glucose, to make cellulose, which is what its leaves are made from, and to produce the starches and things that will be in the grain, and the lignin that's going to be in the roots, and the waxes and the oils, and all of its plant protection compounds that it will use to defend itself from insects and other diseases. So in that process, it is also going to be exuding carbon from its roots to build topsoil. Now you would ask, why would a plant be bothering to do that? Why would it? This photograph here shows you what it looks like when plants are actively exuding carbon from their roots. A lot of crop plants don't actually look like that, and I'm going to explain why, because this is the process that is going to build topsoil and maintain topsoil, and if your plant roots don't look like this, then it's not happening in your crops. Now, what's going on there is that the plant, in order to acquire the minerals and trace elements that it needs from soil, has to feed the biology around its roots. The plant has to have constant exudation of energy, because the things that live in the soil that will make minerals and trace elements available to plants, they are living and they need energy too. They're going to get their energy from the light, that in the same way that plants utilise light, transform it to biochemical energy in the process of photosynthesis. That energy which we also use, we're utilising light energy when we eat plants, or we eat animals that have eaten plants, where basically the plant converted light energy to biochemical energy, and then we consume that energy in the form of food to run our bodies. Well, the microbes that live around plant roots, they also need energy to perform the work of making minerals and trace elements available. So when there's lots of energy coming out of plant roots, you'll see what are called rhizosheaths around the roots, which is the hotspot of microbial activity, and there's lots and lots of life, trillions of different kinds of, trillions in numbers I mean, of microbes, and thousands of different kinds of microbes living in that rhizosheath. The rhizosphere is the area around a plant root, and a rhizosheath is when you have soil sticking around the roots, which is what we want to see for all of our plants. And if we take high magnification, if we look really closely at what's happening inside that rhizosheath, not that one in particular, but just in a healthy rhizosheath, the plant root is to the left and the soil particles are to the right, and what you're seeing in that gap between the plant and the soil are the hyphae of mycorrhizal fungi and trichoderma and all kinds of saprotrophic fungi that are feeding off the sugars that come out of the plant roots, producing sticky substances to hold all that soil around the plant root. And there are also millions of different kinds of or millions in number, I should say, of bacteria and archaea and yeast and all kinds of things living in that environment. So it's a very food-rich, energy-rich, very protected environment, because the rhizosheath maintains moisture in there, and in that's the factory that actually processes all the things that your plant needs. The plant can also fix all of the nitrogen that it needs in a rhizosheath. So it doesn't matter what kind of a plant it is, you don't have to have legumes to fix nitrogen if if your cereals, for example, or whatever it is, have produced riser sheaths, then they will be fixing nitrogen. If we just move back a little bit in slightly lower magnification, this is in a sandy soil in Western Australia where we grow a lot of our wheat. You can't actually see the roots because that's a kind of a close-up of you can see the fungal hyphae holding all the particles together and pulling the soil around the plant roots. If we look at this like in a 3D kind of just a graphic of it, the one on your left is compacted soil that doesn't have good aggregates that have been formed by plant roots, and the one on the right is where the soil particles have been pulled together by the glues and gums from the microbes supported by plants to form good aggregates and therefore lots of pore space in that soil, where water can infiltrate easily, where air can infiltrate easily, and if the roots are going to support microbes that can fix nitrogen, then we have to have lots of atmosphere, lots of air being able to get into that soil. So good soil structure is important for that because the atmosphere is 78% nitrogen, and that's the way plants have obtained their nitrogen for millennia. And if you look around at the green plants, which aren't there at the moment because everything's covered in snow, but in springtime when you do look out and see green plants, most of the ones that you see like along the sides of the road or in people's gardens where they're not using nitrogen, they're green, but no one's putting nitrogen on them. So even the lawn is getting all the nitrogen that it needs from the atmosphere. If we don't have good soil structure, I'm sure you're all aware of what happens, and I saw examples of this yesterday, although what I saw yesterday was covered in snow. But the one on the right, obviously poor soil structure, water lying on the soil surface. It's not able to infiltrate as it is with the one on the left. So if we look in a little bit more detail now as to what is actually going on biochemically inside those riser sheaths, this is a diagram that was drawn by Rudy Garcia, who's within RCS in New Mexico, and there's a lot of detail in there, and I probably don't have time to go into that detail now, but again, this is on my website and you can read all about it there. There's an article called Nitrogen, the Double-Edged Sword, which has this diagram in it. But the green coming down through the centre of that is a fine feeder root, so carbon exudation is more prolific around young, actively growing roots and around young plants, and then the green bits coming off horizontally from that are root hairs, which are too fine for us to see as a general rule with the naked eye. So inside that aggregate you have microaggregates, orange areas that are formed by bacteria pulling soil particles together. The macroaggregate, the blue areas, formed by fungi. There are fungal hyphae coming out of that plant root which pull all the soil particles together, and so it's basically it's bioengineering. It's bacteria and fungi in the soil utilising energy from the plant to build new topsoil. That's how new topsoil forms, and that's the factory that it forms in. So what is it that we want to see happening inside those riser sheaths and macroaggregates? We want to see the plants forming humus, because this is going to be the holy grail for your soil. Humus has very high cation exchange capacity and very high water holding capacity, and it is the primary builder of soil structure. So this is what is going to make it much easier for crops to grow and for them to be much more resilient in the face of climatic extremes or in the face of biotic stresses from pests and diseases, because they'll be able to obtain all the nutrients and things that they need. Humus is about 60% carbon, 6 to 8% nitrogen, and a little bit of phosphorus and sulphur. Always in those same ratios. It doesn't matter what kind of soil or where in the world it's built, it always has the same ratio of those components. That adds to about 70%. The other 30% are minerals in the soil. So it's formed in situ, and it's an organo-mineral complex that there's a combination of carbon and nitrogen, both of which are fixed biologically. And if nitrogen isn't fixed biologically, then carbon cannot be sequestered in a stable form. So if we add it as inorganic nitrogen, it will actually reverse this process and destabilise the carbon in your soil. So if we look at the humic molecule, it looks something like that. You can just see that, well, basically in its simplest forms, we've just got carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen all joined together by microbes. Microbes have created those polymers. The humic polymer is microbial, and the energy for joining those atoms together comes from the plant, comes from photosynthesis. So the more photosynthesis we have and the less chemicals we're using, the more soil we can build, and the more profitable and productive and resilient farming can be, because this is actually the thing that underpins underpins the processes that you need on your farm to support all the things that are going to make it easier for you. The liquid carbon pathway is what I'm describing. As I said, it starts with photosynthesis. We have to have translocation of the carbon compounds formed in the leaves down into the roots. We have to have aggregate formation around the roots and then humification. So there are 4 steps involved in this process, and anything can interrupt those steps at any point along the way. For example, if we use fungicides on our seed or apply them to our plants, we're basically going to disrupt all the things that those fungal hyphae can do in terms of pulling soil particles together and moving things around in the soil. So steps 1 and 2 require the presence of actively growing green plants, and steps 3 and 4 require a diversity of beneficial soil microbes. So this fertile, humus-rich topsoil that we would all like to have on our farms is a product. It's a product of photosynthesis and microbial resynthesis, and it's a product that you can, it's something that you can produce in a relatively small amount of time on your farms. Even though soils we know have been there for a long time, we can rebuild topsoil incredibly quickly, and I'll be talking about that after lunch. So it's photosynthesis, not soil, that forms the base of the pyramid of life. So our pyramid looks like this. We have photosynthesis on the bottom, which requires green plants, light, carbon dioxide and water, do the basic ingredients. Roots and their associated microbes. If we were out in the field, we'd be looking at the roots. How deep are they? How vigorous are they? Do they have riser sheaths? How many different kinds of roots are there? And when we get a great diversity there and everything functioning effectively, then we can build topsoil. And as I said, we can build it quite rapidly. So that word photosynthesis basically means photo means light, synthesis is putting together. So the word means making life from light. And it's a very, very powerful thing that you can implement on your farm with cover crops and diverse cover crops, for example, to quite rapidly build topsoil. But you also have to be aware of the things that interrupt that process, because you can have cover crops and still not build soil if you're interrupting the process with high analysis chemicals. So if we just look historically at what's happened on the major continents over time since European settlement, this is a diagram that was presented to the Food and Agriculture Conference in Rome last year, not by me, but it's in one of their publications. And you see there on the left we have healthy soil as it was when the prairies were intact, as it was when our native grasslands were intact in Australia, and the grasslands, the savannas were intact in southern Africa, etc., and the pampas grasslands in Argentina. It's not just the United States, it's around the world. We have seen this change from where the ecosystem was healthy, was functioning, was building topsoil and maintaining topsoil, and then the next frame, as you go to the right, it says at the bottom NPP decrease. That's net primary production. That means there's less biomass on the soil surface. How did we get less biomass on the soil surface? Well, we either overgrazed it, or we burned it, or we ploughed it, or we sprayed it out, or we've got all these amazing ways that we keep getting rid of biomass. We don't want plants, for whatever reason, to grow there. We think it looks great if it's bare. I don't know where that came from, but what we haven't thought about is that if you have a decrease in the amount of net primary production compared to what it was prior to European settlement, then the next frame is SOC decrease. That's soil organic carbon. If you have less things growing on the soil surface, you will have less carbon in the soil. And when you have less carbon in the soil, that takes you to the fourth frame, which is soil moisture decrease, which is probably not such a huge issue in Ohio from what I can gather. You'd probably like it to be, for it to be going off up into the atmosphere and evapotranspiration to be increasing, as that figure shows. But in most other parts of the world, and in fact most other parts of the United States, water is the limiting factor for production, and people would really be preferring to keep more moisture in your soil. But probably the big issue for you here in Ohio is we go back to the third frame, which is soil organic carbon decrease, because if your organic carbon is going down, you're going to have compaction issues, you're going to have water laying on the surface of the soil, and you're going to have all kinds of pests and diseases issues as well, because it's carbon that is actually going to drive the system, and anything that's going to reduce that is not a good thing. In some parts of the United States, we get the heat dome effect, where we have that kind of environment. If you look at the fourth frame there, where you've got all that massive amount of heat rising from the surface, actually increases temperature regionally. Jonathan Cobb, who I stayed with last week in Texas, has measured on a day when the ambient temperature was 105 degrees, the soil surface of a bare field was 155. So what that means is that you have air that's 105 degrees, it's heating up on that bare soil surface and rising because hot air rises. Then the other air at 105 comes in and heats to 155 and rises. More air comes in, heats up. You're actually generating heat and creating a heat dome. Under a warm season multi-species cover, the soil surface was 77 degrees. But even if you had brown plants there, like even if you had some kind of crop residues or something that was covering the soil surface and maintaining the ambient temperature at 105 degrees, you're not going to get a heat dome effect. But when you've got bare soil and you've got hot air rising, heating up and rising, and they are on black soils there, it definitely creates a heat dome. We have heat dome effects in Australia, and that's what's happening to us right at the moment. That's why it was 120 degrees in Australia recently. We've had a massive heat wave because we have lots and lots of bare ground that we did not have before. So the presence of green plants is the most important factor for climatic stability, but it's also the most important factor for soil health. How long have I got, Randall? 5 minutes. Oh my goodness. Okay. Just very, very quickly, that's a drought year in Australia. There's crop failure there except for where there was a fence. That farmer has been no-till for 30 years. There's been no soil disturbance. It was a grassland prior to that, never ever been opened up. But we have wheat there for 5 months of the year, and then over the hot months, 7 hot months of summer, bare ground, maintained with a chemical fallow. So he's done that for 30 years. This year he just took the fence line out. The fence had weeds growing along it that were capable of responding to rainfall at any time of the year, so there was always something green. There was a big diversity of plants there. There is a huge difference in that soil. Never been cultivated, but where there's been plants growing year-round compared to where there's only been plants for 5 months of the year, look at the difference in the growth. That crop that is growing where the fence line was is not showing any indications of moisture stress. So we have actually created a lot of the issues that we're seeing with our soil by having it bare for a long period of the time. So it's because these actively grown green plants actually support the microbes. It's the microbes that are important, and I'll talk about that this afternoon, that create this well-structured, friable topsoil that we want. So photosynthesis and plant root exudates are now recognised scientifically in international peer-reviewed journals as constituting the primary pathway for soil building. So why is this liquid carbon different to what we call organic matter? Why is it different to returning crop residues to the soil or adding manure to the soil or something else that is actually organic matter? What's the difference between liquid carbon? Well, there's 2 pathways for carbon in the soil, and there's the well-known decomposition pathway where you have something that starts off as biomass like residues or plant roots or animal manures, and then there's the liquid carbon pathway where we have active carbon exuding from roots of green plants. The decomposition pathway still starts with photosynthesis and biomass production, but then all of that material decomposes and goes back to being CO2, or nearly all of it, probably around 98% of it. If you see things like this in the soil, that's a really good sign. That's saprotrophic fungi that are breaking down organic matter, and that's fungal mycelium. That's great. I mean, I'm not saying this process is not good for soil. If you see that, it's fantastic. And we know mulch is great. Decomposing organic matter helps to buffer soil temperatures and maintain moisture, but the soil on the left, that's just decomposing organic matter, will go to be the soil on the right. It cannot stay as it is because decomposition is an active process. It's a catabolic process of breaking things down. The microbes that are involved in decomposition keep on decomposing until there's nothing left there. The other process, the liquid carbon pathway, is an anabolic process, a building up process. It's where very simple carbon compounds come out of plant roots and are polymerised by microbes into complex carbon compounds such as humus, which are very stable in the soil. And if we put those 2 pathways together, you'll see there's a plant in the middle there, and the direct line that's coming down from underneath that is plant root exudates that are leading down to stable soil carbon at the bottom. Over on the left, you'll see there's some leaf litter, and then there's root litter as well that often have lignin, sometimes cellulose, hemicellulose, complex carbon compounds that the microbes that are involved in breaking those things down do produce metabolites, particularly fungal metabolites, that are important to feeding into the humidification process as well. So both of those pathways are important, but the liquid carbon pathway is the primary pathway. We now know that plant root inputs can build soil carbon 5 to 30 times faster than carbon derived from above ground biomass. So when we see people producing huge amounts of soil carbon in a very short amount of time, it doesn't fit the standard model that's related to organic matter. So people will say, well, if you add this many tonnes of organic matter, you're only going to end up with this much left in the soil. So how could you build this much soil carbon? There's disputes raging all of the time about, well, you know, how did Gabe Brown, for example, build all that soil carbon? Because you'd have to add so many tonnes of organic matter that it wouldn't be possible. Well, he's not building it through the decomposition pathway. He's building it through the liquid carbon pathway. And that then answers that problem because it can be 30 times faster. And soil organic carbon is that one single measurable factor that tells us most about soil health. I think I'm probably right out of time now. So I'm just going to skip over these and just tell you that just this one, statistics show that 50% of the world's cropland is bare in any 12-month period. Actually, I just need to go back. 30% of the world's cropland has been abandoned in the last 40 years due to soil decline, and it continues to be abandoned at the rate of 25 million acres a year, and that's all again from international peer-reviewed scientific journals. And why? Well, because it's bare. So it doesn't matter, you know, cultivated or zero-tilled. If there's no green plants there, then you're still not going to be building soil carbon. So I think I'm going to have to leave it there.
So, what do you think? This is a super fast lecture. I hope you could get some important aspects. If you did not understand anything, please put that in chat. So I'll provide the gist of it. So she started off with actually her website. I have provided in the chat box. Please look at that. And on YouTube also there are several videos of her explaining all these scientific processes. So she started off saying that about agricultural production, its revenue, and 98% of agricultural production revenue is kind of taken by input industries. Like, while the production doubled because of intensive agriculture, farmers' incomes have halved. So they reduced by 50%. So farmers' situation is like, whoever is participating in green revolution technologies, all of that, their incomes are dropping. Okay, and there are nutritional related diseases. They are on the rise. Autoimmune disorders are on the rise, and these are not infectious diseases. All these diseases she was mentioning was because of lack of proper nutrition. Your body is diseased, and this is kind of estimated to be about $1.1 trillion a year. All these disease related things, and associated with this, a lot of emotional disturbance, family undergoes all of that. So agriculture is supposed to be food, and the nutritional value in our foods is lower today. And when compared to 1940s, the nutrient density in the foods was good, and over time, because the soil quality is compromised, in order to derive same nutrition from meat, you have to eat double the quantity, and when compared to 1940, and you have to consume 3 times the food and 4 to 5 times the vegetable quantity in order to get the same amount of nutrients. So our foods do not have sufficient nutrients. Okay. So this is because of use of agrochemicals and plants are susceptible to a lot of pests and diseases, all of it. And now farmers are spending more and more, and the situation is getting worse and worse. And she talked about dilution effect and soil depletion, all of that. So I think she was talking about one thing about the nitrate content in the grain. So when nitrate content in the grain is high, it automatically says that insecticides are less on that particular fruit. So consumers are now preferring to foods that have high N content by the way they are produced. And for all these diseases, dilution or soil depletion is not the cause, because plants are no longer getting the trace elements. So and then she started off explaining about soil. That soil is foundation of everything, and from weathering process. Weathering is a process where rocks are disintegrated and fine material called soil is formed. So if there are no plants, there are no healthy soil. So that is one thing. So plants only can make a soil healthy. So, and then she introduces one more important scientific aspect. What's happening in the root system is what she introduces as rhizosheaths. Rhizosheaths are kind of a tubular soil covering around the root. Okay, so that is an indicator of a healthy soil, and soil should stick to all the roots. When you plug the plant with all its root system, soil should be sticking to the roots. That's a healthy indicator. So what is she telling you? Lot of processes happen in the rhizosheath, like so inside the rhizosheath, the atmospheric potential and all are very congenial for a lot of nutrients to be transform and be available, and a lot of microbial activity is there. So rhizosheath is one thing you need to study a lot. Okay, so and she talks about humus. It is high in CEC. CEC is cation exchange capacity. So actually clay particles have negative charge on their surface, so that all the cationic nutrients can go there and get absorbed to the surface, and then they can be readily taken by plant roots. So the finer the soil particle is, the higher the surface area, and CEC is also the highest. So compared to sand particles, the clay particle has a lot of surface area, and the cation exchange capacity is very high. And now humus is also like a clay particle. It has a lot of cation exchange capacity. And humus is an organo-mineral complex. So means organic material is there, mineral matter is also there. Mineral like nitrogen, organic substance carbon. It is a complex substance compound. So, and she tells that if nitrogen is not biologically fixed in the soil, carbon sequestration cannot happen. So I think we need to study more about that. And she tells that in order to have a good soil structure, we heard in the previous video that soil particles are stuck to each other through some cementing substances, glues. So for these glues to be formed, energy is required. Energy comes from sugar. Sugar comes from photosynthesis. So that is the process in which soil gets healthy and gets in form. Okay, so photosynthesis and plant cover is very essential. And she she tells that there are two pathways of carbon. One is organic matter decomposition that we all know, like you compost all the debris, okay, and the debris is useful for microbes, and the microbes release nutrients from the organic matter through a process called decomposition. Carbon dioxide is released, and the nutrients get utilized by plants. All of that is there. And she's telling that we know this first pathway, but the second pathway is very important. That is liquid carbon pathway, where these root exudates, that is very important. And she told that photosynthesis, translocation to the roots. Translocation means photosynthesis happens, on the chloroplast, and then food is transferred from leaf to rest of the body. That is called translocation. And these sugars get transferred to roots, and when they are released, aggregates, soil aggregates form, and then humidification is there, all of that. So first two steps, photosynthesis and translocation, it can happen only through green plants. Whereas aggregate formation and humidification is the job of soil microbes. So the topsoil is, in effect, is a product of photosynthesis and microbial resynthesis. So that is one aspect. So she also talked about earlier how we view soil in the base of pyramid. If you look at soil in that simplistic way, you tend to test the soil for its quality and determine which nutrients are high, less. Based on that, you add some more nutrients, all of that. But if you look at soil in a different perspective, soil is not the foundation, but is a end product of it. So then at the base, photosynthesis, all of that will come, and then microbial soil, microbe-activity will come, and then soil is the resultant. So I think we should view our soil in that manner. So in order for a healthy soil to be formed, photosynthesis and soil microbiology are important. Plants and microbes, the together are required. And she also told about heat dome effect, that if the outside temperature is 105 degrees Fahrenheit, the soil temperature will be 155 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so Walter was telling in one of his previous videos that in Anantapur, the soil in hot summer, the soil temperature will be up to 70 degrees Celsius. Normally we have peak temperatures around 45, but soils can get even more hotter. So I think she is also reiterating the same heat dome effect. So in that harsh temperatures, soil biology cannot survive, and organic matter, whatever is there, gets desiccated, and soil carbon is lost. So she also told, whereas in the same temperature of 105 degrees Fahrenheit ambient temperature, when the soil is covered with crops, the temperature is 77 degrees Fahrenheit. So, plants, have a great role. Plant cover has a great role in cooling the soils and also the surroundings. So, and further on liquid carbon pathway, she tells one important thing that in order to increase the soil organic carbon content in the soil, if we have to compare two methods. One is adding a lot of mulch, incorporating all of that, versus growing plants continuously. Okay, then the soil organic carbon buildup in the soil carbon buildup is 5 to 30 times faster in liquid pathway, because plant roots go deeper, and root exudates are released into that kind of depth. Okay, so it's like direct injection at greater depth. So this pathway is much more efficient and can change the health of soil very fast. And soil in organic carbon is one simple, a good primary indicator to determine the health of soil. And she mentioned some statistics that 50% of world's crop land is bare in any 12-month period, and it is a source for source for releasing a lot of carbon from it. And 30% of land has been abandoned in last 40 years because of soil degradation. So because of intensive agricultural practices and leaving the soils bare, then soils are degraded. So they are degraded means unfit for cultivation. You cannot get the same productivity from such soils, and therefore those soils are abandoned. So per year, 25 million acres are being abandoned. So that is the gravity of the issue. So if we don't take care of our soil, there are a lot of repercussions at micro level and macro level, and civilization do collapse. So this is the gist of what she has presented in 35 minutes lecture. You please watch her other videos also, where she explains about each of those important plant nutrients. Like on nitrogen, there is one long video. On phosphorus, there is one long video. And you will understand a lot of scientific processes that actually are mediated by soil microbiology. So this is the gist of Christine Jones' video. So I think that's it. And regarding the next video, Paul Hawken, I'll give some introduction. I don't think we'll run through the video, because I have seen that, and he's kind of it is a Q&A session with Paul Hawken, and Paul Hawken is the author of one great book called Drawdown Agriculture. So drawdown agriculture means carbon farming, bringing carbon down into the soil, how can be done. So in that video, he was explaining how he was able to influence a lot of big agri corporates, and their willingness to completely shift their agriculture-based value chain to regenerative agricultural practices, and they knowing the importance promoting regenerative agriculture on a large scale, all of that. So for time being, we will skip that video, but you do watch it later. And we'll go to the next video. I think that one is the last video. Okay.
No, sir. It's a second last.
Second last.
Yes,
if you're not already familiar with Paul, he is a prolific researcher and writer, written a number of books, including Drawdown, Natural Capital. He has another book coming out, I'm not surprised, called Regenerate, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. So that sounds really hopeful, and I'm looking forward to reading that book. Paul also has a deep history in starting businesses, growing businesses that work with growers to reward them for the practices that they use. And from that experience, he has consulted a number of large global companies around the world to do the very same. So Paul brings tremendous insight, tremendous experience to help us understand and navigate this growing market of ag carbon
can you
credits.
respond?
So Paul, one, welcome, and two, thank you for talking with us today.
Yeah, good morning, Ryan. Thank
Shivakuti,
you.
can you hear?
I loved seeing that intro video of the farmers.
Yeah, it's audible.
Shivakuti, can you hear me?
Yeah. We hear you. I hear you.
Please respond. Shivakuti, please respond.
Sir,
Yo, don't
hello.
play this.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes. Another video, sir.
Last one you play, please.
Okay.
When I turned 50, I started looking back at what my behaviour was leaving as a legacy for the planet. And I just didn't like what I saw
Can you
at all.
turn on subtitles?
We're all sick because of the way we eat and because of the way we farm.
I was inducted into, if you like, the industrial farming paradigm. And it was only after the 1982 drought that I realised there had to be a better way and to avoid debt.
Hey, I am going for a vacation where I'll be totally cut off from my business.
When I turned 50, I started looking back at what my behaviour was leaving as a legacy for the planet. And I just didn't like what I saw at all.
We're all sick because of the way we eat and because of the way we farm.
I was inducted into, if you like, the industrial farming paradigm. And it was only after the 1982 drought that I realised there had to be a better way and to avoid debt and harming the landscape. And so I began to study alternate methods, which led me to regenerative agriculture.
People often ask me what changed when we changed the way we run the place. No, I think it's just one word, and it's just mindset. We changed from being stock managers to being land managers.
Regenerative agriculture covers a variety of practices, from ecological grazing to agroforestry to using biological inputs in cropping, things like permaculture, biodynamics. It's a wide range, but they're all around regenerating how the landscape works. We humans can actually allow nature to improve herself if we enable her. Through improving your landscape health, you improve the resilience, you ride out the droughts, and it's ending up being a lot more profitable. The latest research is showing it's much better for human health, mental and physical.
Lots of the products we're applying to the landscape on an annual basis have a negative effect on life. Now, what the world needs for the future, what human beings and all life need humans to be doing, is to have an agricultural system that the consequence of management is to increase diversity, not diminish it. And without that, we're in a real dilemma.
Out of my own farming journey, having made all the mistakes and then realised there were some wonderful solutions where I could do it easier without debt and regenerate landscapes. I was always passionate about nature. I ended up going back in my late 50s to university and doing a PhD looking at all this and why farmers had changed. And out of that came my book, Call of the Reed Warbler. The book's really about these wonderful farmers, David Marsh, for example, who's one of the leaders in regenerative grazing, holistic grazing in Australia.
Sometimes there are quite big differences between how conventionally managed farms look compared to those that are being managed holistically. What we see with regenerative grazing practices, you graze the plants for a very short period of time, and you've got to have a fencing system that allows you to move the animals around so that you've got enough recovery time for your paddocks to recover. Whereas when you've got stock in every paddock and you've got to graze down really short, the plant roots are very small. Those little insignificant falls of rain that are very important for a regenerative system. In the conventional system, they seem to do nothing because any growth that happens is being grazed immediately. So we're allowing plants to get big, which makes the root systems invade a bigger area of soil and puts a lot of organic matter into the soil, which helps it hold water. If you've got plants that are useful for grazing, they evolved here, they're re-establishing here, there's a diversity of them, they'll take advantage of rainfall at any time of the year. That's incredibly valuable, and we haven't spent any money putting them here.
Some people get confused when we talk about the new ecological grazing. It was actually developed by an ecologist, a guy called Alan Savory in, as it was then, Rhodesia, watching those giant animal herds in the millions migrating, and you'd think that such huge numbers disturbing and eating would degrade a grassland, but he found the opposite. It was the healthiest grassland you'd ever find. Led by him but others, they've now refined a management system for we farmers on commercial landscapes to replicate that ecological impact. So you make more paddocks, get as bigger mobs as you can, doing the same thing, but this time under human management.
We went through 9 years of drought from 2002 to 2010, and we didn't spend a cent on feeding. So that saved us between $500,000 and $800,000, which is a massive amount of money in a farming business. We've learned how to estimate how much grass we've got ahead of us all the time so that we're constantly adjusting our stocking rate so that we're not overstocked. That means that you don't have to spend any money feeding. So that is a massive change from the past. You know, instead of feeling anxious and out of control and debt spiralling and that sort of thing, we're not going through that.
Not far from where I live is a friend of mine, Charlie Maslin, and he's doing some remarkable stuff. He's got a running creek through his property which hasn't been functioning all that well because a lot of the water disappears or erodes in big storms, and he's set about using what's called natural sequence farming, and so by slowing down the water and holding it, he's now rehydrating his landscape.
We're really trying to recreate the water systems that existed prior to settlement. When I came home, it was at the end of a fairly long 4-year drought, and our creek corridor was just a dry, barren, weed-infested corridor. One of the things we've done on the place is installed leaky weirs in a lot of the streams. And a leaky weir is basically just a structure in a stream so that when water comes down with runoff in a flood environment, it slowly leaks through and continue on downstream at a much slower rate. What we're trying to do with putting the weirs in is just to hold back more water at the top end of the place, so that when it does get dry and the stream stops flowing, there's water there just to keep slowly making its way downstream. And that's in this dry country with very sporadic rainfall, that's the way we need to keep our streams flowing. The biggest thing, I think, is probably managing the stock that are in this area. Stock are a great thing as a healer of the banks with lots of intensity, but then for every bit of intensity of stock being in there, you need a lot of rest. And that under normal grazing systems, a lot of streams don't get rest. And by taking the stock out, all the profusion of life that you can see here now just wouldn't have occurred. Giving a lot of these holes much more life, it gives chances for plants to grow. It's also handy for the stock and for birds and for platypus and for all the animals that live along the creek. Nature works wonders if humans are kept out of it for a while and animals are kept out for a little while.
Not far from here, some friends of mine, Beatrice and Tobias Koenig, who are leading biodynamic farmers in a fairly tough environment, growing healthy biodynamic soils. And that's all through getting your soil biology going, accessing all the nutrients that industrial agriculture shuts out by killing that soil biology. So it's fairly simple stuff, but it's profound.
You know, we have flavor. There are plenty of people who say that our potatoes are fantastic and our garlic is really good and Beatrice vegetables. You address the chemistry in the soil and then you address the biology. So the biology is addressed by using cover crops and compost teas, including biodynamic preparations. All the nutrients we think are needed, which does, for instance, include lime or gypsum, or we use a lot of fish, we use a lot of seaweed. That's a fairly small plant, and that root system. And every single root is surrounded by soil. And what that actually tells you is that there is soil biology happening. What I mean with that is that they're not only the necessary nutrients in the soil, but there are microbes and fungi and all little critters and earthworms working in the soil, cycling stuff. If we would go into another paddock that we haven't worked anything on, you wouldn't see that. You would see a few roots and they would be pretty much bare, no soil. Agriculture is hard work, but it can be very, very rewarding if, for instance...
So you had seen the roots, no? So roots are not visible actually. There's all over soil sticking to it. That's a very healthy indicator, okay? So now there is one more kind of indicator of soil health is like assessing what percent of roots are in white color and how many are covered with soil, all of them. So the percent is, people started taking that as an indicator also. Yeah, please continue.
You've got people telling you that your produce is not only tasteful, but actually nourishes you rather than just feeding you. And if you see that the place is getting better, it's just very rewarding.
The big question, how important is regenerative ag in addressing the biggest issues of our time? We now know in 5 continents, for example, ecological grazing is regenerating tens of millions of hectares. We now know that the very best way of pulling down excess carbon from the atmosphere is through healthy agriculture, regenerative plants, regenerative systems, burying carbon long-term in the soil. One of the questions I get asked is how are we going to feed the world without industrial agriculture, industrial inputs? People forget that 70% of the world's food comes off 5 acres and less off peasant farms. And interestingly, the majority of those farmers are women. But on the rest of it, where there was once industrial farming, regenerative farming is more than capable of filling the gap with all the added benefits. The question of change is the big one in this moment in time on Earth, as we're rapidly racing down this economic rationalist industrial paradigm, consuming more and destroying more. How do we change is the question.
There are a lot of what I'd call industrial farmers who have an ecological conscience, but they don't really make the connection between ecology and complexity and how that relates to their business. And we've found that our business has gone a heck of a lot better since we've been making decisions towards the environment. I think a lot of people are worried about feeling marginalised or ostracised. It's a courageous thing to to swim against the tide.
It's not about saying I'm biodynamic and therefore I'm better. No, we have to be open to everything and actually create an environment where my neighbor is not offended by what I'm doing, but interested in what I'm doing. And it's the only chance to get it, to change the whole situation.
The thing I want to emphasise about this story, where I've really highlighted how regenerative agriculture can help save the planet and human health, is that that's only half the story. The other half is we need urban people to start connecting with the regenerative ag movement, and they can do that either by supporting farmers markets or buying product directly. But they can also do it in their own power. Growing their own veggies is a hell of a start. It's got to be an indivisible connection between people out there in the urban areas, getting acquainted with what's going on out here, but also how it integrates with what they can do and are doing.
We've seen ourselves as outside of nature for a long time, for probably a couple of 100 years, but really we're just another species. Sometimes people think that evolution's all about competition, but there's a heck of a lot of cooperation in the change of evolution over time and adapting to circumstance.
I think this is the last video, and I think the message is very clear. I think farmers all over the world who have been doing industrial model of agriculture have the same problems as we are having. So our productivities are dropping down, input responsiveness is coming down, farmers are getting into distress, net incomes are falling and often running into negatives. All of that is even the case with those in other countries as well. So everybody is making a shift to regenerative agriculture. So in that sense, we are all a community together who are trying to find solutions to the global problem. So I think they have discussed a variety of regenerative agriculture approaches like permaculture, biodynamic, all of that. And they shared their personal journey that when you switch to regenerative organic methods, like in their case, what you have seen is pasture-based livelihood. That is, a huge land is there for growing grass, and cattle feed on that. If you don't control that, actually soil has to take some time, crops have to take some time to grow on the soil and change the soil. So it has to be divided into blocks, and animals should be let in one block, and then after it is finished, then after some months or weeks it should be channeled to the next block, so that the first plot will rejuvenate and have some time like that. So that is what they call controlled grazing. So it is one of the serious issues there in Western world where uncontrolled grazing is there. Okay, so now once they started regenerative agriculture, even these water systems have also revived in their farms. So there are water rivulets, all of that, small creeks that are flowing. So what they were commenting is that many people who are farmers who are into industrial agriculture also have some ecological awareness, but they are worried that their income would be compromised if they suddenly stop industrial agriculture and switch to regenerative agriculture. But their experience, what they are sharing is, once you have ecology as priority, and that will lead you into prosperity. So it is very profitable to take up regenerative agriculture, is what they are saying from their experience. So I think this is the These are all the videos that we have to understand. And I think if you have any topics that we should discuss more, please use this time. Put up in chat box your questions. Anyone has anything to add, their comments, you can use this time. 3-4 minutes, okay? Nobody has anything to say? Could you follow? Rambab sir, I think we don't know exactly actually. So Walter has given a macro picture of 20 billion tons per year globally, but hectare, how much it translates to is not known.
అది కనుక్కుంటే బాగుంటుంది.
Yeah, okay. So, and also he told that it is all a flow.
Yeah.
And we are drawing it and putting it, not all of the carbon will stay there. It transforms and some of it gets released also. So yeah, we'll try to ask this question. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for the question.
Sir, Dharmendra garu.
Yes, Chappan sir.
Yeah, Walter has given that 40 billion hectares. So you can calculate that with that picture. That's that what I feel.
Yeah. Correct.
అంటే అలా మన క్యాలిక్యులేషన్ అనేది కూడా ఎంతవరకు కరెక్ట్ అనేది ఒక క్వశ్చన్. ఎందుకంటే ప్రపంచం అంతా ఒకేసారి మారిపోదు కదా.
Sir, it is hypothetical values.
Hypothetical estimation.
Don't make it as accurate figures, and we should not much.
అల్టిమేట్ గా మనం ఫార్మర్ దగ్గరికి వెళ్ళినప్పుడు, లేదంటే జనరల్ పీపుల్ తో ఈ విషయం గురించి, రీజనరేటివ్ అగ్రికల్చర్ ఇంపాక్ట్ గురించి మాట్లాడుతున్నప్పుడు అది కొంచెం ఇంపార్టెంట్ అవుతుంది యాక్చువల్ గా. అందరూ చేయరు. మన 10 ఎకరాల్లో లేకపోతే 2 ఎకరాల్లో మనం చేస్తుంటాము. దానివల్ల ఎంత అవుద్ది అనేది ఒక అంచనా ఉంటే పక్క వాళ్ళు చేయరు, ఇంకో ముందు వాళ్ళు చేయరు, లేదు ఒక గ్రామం అంతా చేస్తారు. ఇప్పుడు విజయనగరం జిల్లాలో వాళ్ళ 96 గ్రామాల్లో బయో విలేజెస్ చేశారు కదా. అట్లా చేసినప్పుడు ఏమవుతుంది, లేదా ఒక 2 ఎకరాల్లో 3 ఎకరాల్లో చేసినప్పుడు ఏమవుతుంది, 10 ఎకరాల్లో 15 ఎకరాల్లో చేసినప్పుడు ఏమవుతుంది కంటిన్యూస్ గా. అట్లా ఏదన్నా కొంత ఇన్ఫర్మేషన్ తీసుకోగలిగితే బాగుంటుంది సార్ ధర్మేంద్ర గారు.
Yes, sir. Actually, Trimurtulu sir, please add. Soil organic carbon content measuring is a direct indicator, no? So, how many times during the year?
So, no. We can measure, sir, as Rambab asked that we can measure, and then what is the soil organic carbon sequestration and what is happening and all. But a little bit exercise we can do, and the spot values we can give that. No problem.
Yeah.
So we need to work out that, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes.
అలా మెజర్ చేయడానికి పద్ధతులు అందుబాటులో ఉన్నాయంట.
Yes, sir. We have that. Soil carbon can be estimated in all soil testing labs. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Comes in percentages and ఎంత percent ఉంది అనేది. Yes, anybody?
సార్ రామచంద్రం
సార్
సార్,
ఇప్పుడు సైంటిఫిక్ డేటా సిన్స్ ఫ్రమ్ 1940s నుంచి ఇప్పటి వరకు దిస్ మచ్ ఆఫ్ సైంటిఫిక్ డేటా ఈజ్ అవైలబుల్ దట్ ది సాయిల్స్ ఆర్ వెరీ రిచ్ ఓన్లీ త్రూ మైక్రో ఆర్గానిజమ్స్ డెవలప్మెంట్. So the soil can be built through them only, and the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is that can be fixed in the soil. But knowing all these facts, why our scientists are more towards the chemical agriculture? Still I am not able to understand why. Everybody knows this type of agriculture only can save the world. Not now, since for the last 70 to 80 years, everybody is knowing all those things. Why we are promoting chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides? This I am not able to understand. If anybody can throw some light on this, like Dr. Trimurthulu sir, we will hear.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And before answering, I thought that what is your experience? You leave that before coming into the natural farming. What is your experience? I am putting that. You might be doing the cultivation so many years, isn't it?
Sir, by not knowing all these facts, we are knowing these facts since last 10 years only. But scientists could know this thing before that. That's
After,
what. But it is not at least it is not a subject in BSc agriculture. I wonder why.
See, that's a good question. It takes a lot of, information. I have to put it and compile the things. But one thing that, see, after the Second World War in the 1950, after the introduction of the Green Revolution, because a lot of food scarcity has come, then there is immediate, source is that going for the conventional agriculture because of the hybrid varieties which are responding. You see that it's my experience. I'm telling that if you put more fertilizers, it's a more yield. That is the way it went up. But without considering the environmental pollution and all, people went into the line of production, a lot of increasing the productivity of the soils. Like that, they went and then finally they made a damage to the at a stage of unrepairable stage. That is the one we have. See, in the last, before my retirement, I think in the 2006 to 2012, I worked in a project in the Guntur district. So only how the soils changed because of the application of the chemicals and fertilizers and all, with a collaboration of 7 institutes across the country. We published in an international way. We lost so many microbes, but still this is the 1 or 2 publications like that. It went from the universities. So in the institutions of the even ICR system, in the national level also. But they know that, but all of a sudden, if you say that change the shift may not be acceptable to the in the farming community. That is also another criteria. Because of that reason, it's not a one-day job. Slowly we can build up this, we can change and we can come into the this natural farming system. That is the one.
Yeah, sir. As you said, if you use more fertilizers, more yield. But that is not actually not working out now. Because the optimum operation of any plant or any crop can utilize the optimum fertilizers to some extent only. So every year we are increasing the fertilizers, and they are more prone to pests and diseases. So unnecessarily we are incurring more cost inputs.
No. I am agreeing with you, Ramchandran Garu. Now the stage has come to realize all the people. Now definitely the realization will appear. So they stop. They come into the line of the using the natural resources. I won't say the
Acceptance
one.
is building now, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So the change will come at a slowly. That's not in one day.
Sir, the scientists should also speak the same language. That I feel.
No, that's
And
what
that
we
is
are
the
doing.
need of our.
That's what we are doing, Ramchandran garu.
You are retired, sir. The people, the
No,
people who
there
are
is
in
one thing you
associated with
realize, there is
research.
no retirement for the human being. So
Yeah,
I think
okay.
people will
Great.
come into the line.
Great.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. So anyone, last words? How was it? Youngsters, you're all keeping quiet. Still processing the information from the videos.
In the previous from the previous debate, I just have to say.
Rachit,
Yeah,
are you talking?
am I audible?
Yeah, barely audible.
Hello, hello. Am I audible clearly now?
Yeah, go on.
So from the last debate, I just have one point to say that even in the past, smoking is injurious to health. To prove it in the public domain, it took 80 years to realize that. So the same thing is happening with this natural farming, that there are doubts which has been created by corporates which are selling those pesticides and insecticides and all those chemical fertilizers. That is why there is doubt between farmers a lot, and I think more and more awareness will make this doubt out of their minds, and then we will have more this kind of agriculture everywhere.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, with time, awareness will be built and things change. Yeah, and also we see when we are talking about natural farming, it is not exactly the same traditional farming that was before Green Revolution. It is, I think we should see this as far more advanced than modern agriculture, instead of comparing it with traditional agriculture. Traditional agriculture did not know, I don't know. This much knowledge was there with ancient people, previous generations. I don't know, but with the scientific discoveries, all of that, we are finding a lot of answers. We are testing it on ground, and some people are taking it forward in the field, and they are able to demonstrate results. The EVC sir was mentioning that, Walter said to EVC sir that he was teaching all these concepts for 10 years or more, but only Vijay Kumar sir started to test that on ground, and he could see results through PMDS, all of that. So I think it is very advanced knowledge that we have in order to build healthy soils and restore things back to place. So I think if anybody doesn't have anything to say or comment, I think we can close this. Thank you very much. And the participation is only around 45. We have attendance for every session. So whoever is having some genuine issues, they are informing us, and we are marking their comments separately against their participation status. But see that many people, many of your group members join. Please have discussion among yourselves. Organize some calls. Okay. So, okay, with this, we can close it. Thank you very much for participating and contributing.